Despite not having any on-screen adventures between spring and Christmas, the 15th Doctor has been rather busy the last few months with adventures in other mediums. And here on the Canon Catch-up, it's my job to sift through them all for you, find out any lore we learnt, and find a place for them on 15's timeline. This episode did 15 appear in an 11th Doctor story over a year before he debuted on TV. We're covering that and giant eye creatures and an eccentric individual from the Doctor's past in the first 4 issues of a brand new Doctor Who magazine comic adventure. Another issue in the ongoing Titan comic story Everything Must Go, and several audio original stories from BBC Audio. There will be some spoilers ahead, but I'll try and keep them to a minimum. So let's crack on, shall we? This is what the timeline looked like at the end of our last episode. I've realised I've never explained the colour coding, so very quickly, blue is TV episodes, orange is Doctor Who magazine comics, yellow is Titan comics, green is novels, red is video games, grey is unseen but mentioned adventures, and pink is live events. Phew! Anyway, on with the new additions. Before we get to the case of the 11th and 15th Doctors crossover, let's first of all look at the comics. The Monster Makers, parts 1 to 4 from Doctor Who magazine. The Doctor and Ruby land in a place that frankly seems very much based on Hill Valley in the 1950s from the film series Back to the Future, and they are immediately mistaken for invaders. A quick hop forwards 5 minutes in the TARDIS and they see the place is actually being invaded, this time by giant eyes-on bodies. After getting separated and both independently teaming up with some locals, who seem to want to be invaded, the invasion is called off by some descending adjudicators, who start performing a focus group survey on the residents and take Ruby up to their HQ in space when they realise she is an interloper. The eyeball monsters were made by Cohort Co., a company that makes custom-grown armies, who are currently pitching to an eccentrically dressed man named Xerxes, who really likes using X-word puns. An unhinged businessman who has a bizarre fascination with the letter X, you say? Ridiculous, of course, would never happen in the real world. They dissolve the returned monsters and the resident that Ruby befriended, meaning he was just another one of their creations. And they offer Ruby a job. Not that they give her an option to say no, they want exclusive rights to everything in her head, especially ideas for monsters. Now this moment gives us some very clear indication of timeline placement for this story, as we see a display of lots of creatures Ruby has met. There are the moth creatures and the ice cream from previous Doctor Who magazine comics, as well as creatures I don't think we've seen before, so probably from some unseen adventures, and some TV story creatures like the goblins from Church on Ruby Road, the bogeyman from Space Babies, and, most important for our purposes, the Cholder, the bird creatures from the TV episode Rogue. So this story must take place between that and the 2-part season 1 finale. At the beginning of the story though, Ruby also wonders if the events from the previous comic story has caused the console to play up, meaning that story also needs to go in this part of the timeline, which is not where we put it before, so we need to move that. In fact, they're even wearing the same clothes in both, so we can assume this one comes immediately after the Hands of Fear. Down on the planet, the townspeople are transformed into monsters in order to attack the Doctor, but he calmed and lured one of them into the TARDIS by playing the Venusian Lullaby on the jukebox, a tune used by the 3rd Doctor on Peladon many years before in TV stories The Curse of Peladon and The Monster of Peladon. And even by other Doctors going way back to the first Doctor in Expanded Universe stories. The temporal grace field within the TARDIS, previously shown to disable weapons, also apparently has a calming effect as well, allowing the transformed town person to regain her faculties. Xerxes decided he is going to buy the whole Cohort Co. company and immediately starts replacing staff with AI robots. Again, completely unbelievable. Don't know where they get these ideas. He also recognises the TARDIS and the name the Doctor and claims the Doctor had encountered his grandfather once and destroyed him. His grandfather being the Great Extortioner, with an X, who from his volcano base had warheads aimed at every major city in Galaxy 5. someone who the Doctor doesn't recall and says he may need to narrow it down a bit more. Galaxy 5, by the way, is an existing bit of lore and once fought a war against the Galactic Federation, as mentioned in The Monster of Peladon. This story isn't over yet though, there's a to be continued at the end of part 4, so we'll pick this up again next episode. Everyone Must Go Part 3 and 4. With the concluding parts of this Titan comic storyline, we'll also need to move some stuff on our timeline due to new information, but we'll get to that. We see the Doctor and the Scream Simile confront each other in a pocket dimension of the Similies that is focused around fears. The Doctor identifies the Similie as being from beyond the universe, saying he's met things like him before, possibly a reference to the Toymaker and Maestro. He works out the fake Cybermen are powered by potentiality, the idea of what could happen, and he taps into that power to give the TARDIS enough energy to get back to the shopping mall. Ruby, meanwhile, has convinced her giant cockroach new friends to come upstairs to find the Doctor, but the humans turn pitchfork on them, throwing the Canker out into the solar flare-ravaged landscape and almost do the same to Ruby, before the Doctor turns up and stops them. While the Doctor is distracted, however, the Similie takes the little girl, Maria. It turns out that Maria was actually from one of the starships that had left Earth, the starship Enoch, which was attacked by the Cybermen, and just before her parents were killed, they managed to send Maria back to Earth using a vortex manipulator hidden in a teddy bear. They send her to Earth hoping someone there will be able to get her back to Starship UK, from the TV episode The Beast Below, where her aunt and uncle are. After the Doctor defeats the Similie by finding his cellar of bottled screams and smashing a load of them and threatening to smash more, the Doctor returns Maria to her aunt and uncle on Starship UK. The Similie admits defeat and retreats, warning that the one who waits is coming, which we now know is Sutekh, who returned in the Season 1 finale. So why does this need to move from where we'd previously put it in the timeline? Well, a couple of things. The Doctor had recognised one of the humans in the shopping centre and tells Ruby it was the same face as on The Ambulance, from Boom, and Lindy's mum, from Dot and Bubble. So it's certainly after those episodes. But he also says that UNIT may be able to help work it out, which sounds very much like it leads almost immediately into the Legend of Ruby Sunday. If not immediately, then at least very close to it. So let's pop this whole storyline right before the Legend of Ruby Sunday, which means we also need to move the free comic book day issue, as that one seemed to lead directly into this story. Big Finish's The World Tree. So, let's get to that 11th Doctor story that might have a fleeting appearance from the 15th Doctor. Unknowingly stuck in a time loop from August the 19th, 1987, a Wednesday, Nora Wicker notices a man in her garden, the 11th Doctor. He claims he can help her escape the time loop that she didn't know she was in, with the help of a future version of himself on the outside of the time loop bubble by linking up their sonic screwdrivers. He says it would be the same sonic, but I mean that could just mean the same software, in the same way that it was in the 50th anniversary special. The Doctor on the other side of the bubble is only ever described vaguely.
A dark figure stepped out, its details obscured by the barrier, like looking through an ever-shifting block of patterned glass.
The description is vague enough that it could be any future incarnation, but the writer, Nick Slorich, has said that he intended this to be the 15th Doctor. I messaged him on Twitter to check, and he did confirm. Here's what he said. Sort of. So basically what happened is that I wrote the story knowing that it needed to be a future Doctor, around the time that 15, then mostly known as 14, had been cast, but his costume hadn't been announced. If I'd put my final draft in a week later, I also might have made a more obvious reference to 15's style, but they might have vetoed that. I didn't tell Big Finish about any of this ahead of time, asked forgiveness and not permission and all that. So, where do we put it in 15's timeline? A part of the plot, as I said, is that they both use their sonics at the same moment on the time bubble. It talks about it being the same device, but as I said, we know from Day of the Doctor that in some ways, mainly the programming, it is always the same device in a different casing. But, and this may just be me, but I feel that if the Sonic had had a wildly different shape, as the 15th Doctor's does, it would have been commented on, even if it couldn't have been seen clearly from inside the bubble. Now, the real world reason for this is obviously that when Nick was writing this, the 15th Doctor's sonic screwdriver had not been revealed. Nobody knew what it looked like, and there was no reason to think it wouldn't be a long cylindrical stick-looking thing. but by chance that's the situation we're in, so for this reason I'm going to assume it's before he's got his new style Sonic, and he still has a stick-shaped one. So for that reason, plus the fact that it came out before he'd even debuted on screen, plus he's not mentioned as having a companion with him, I'm going to put this right at the beginning of 15's life, fairly soon after the giggle. Perhaps even he's still using a version of the Sonic that looks like 14's. BBC Audio's On Ghost Beach. 15 made his BBC original audiobook debut in November, the first of which finds the Doctor and Ruby land in County Durham, England in 1958 on Seaham Chemical Beach, a former site of heavy industry where locals are having nightmares and seeing things. The Doctor and Ruby start to forget who they are and get the memories instead of two individuals, William Finkel and Charlotte Wilson. And they discover a special rift in the cave that leads them to Ghost Beach, on the Sea of Despair on the planet Far From. But it's a one-way rift, and they can't get back. There they encounter Reg, who is from Seaham and was friends with the people whose memories the TARDIS team now have. His house is also there. Or is it? Spoiler warning. But it turns out that the real Reg is dead, after wandering through the rift and encountering an alien entity called Kasif that, in trying to communicate telepathically with Reg, burnt out Reg's mind and was using his memories to try and understand him, projecting ghosts back through the rift and the memories of Reg's friends into the Doctor and Ruby's mind. The entity also tries to communicate with Ruby, almost killing her before the Doctor takes her place. The temptation of the entity's knowledge almost convinces him to fully merge with his mind, but it's the promise the Doctor made to Ruby to not abandon her that makes him pull back, and they end up sending the entity on its way, planning to find new ways to communicate that won't accidentally kill people. In this story, the Doctor references going to Lord Byron's wedding, uninvited. We don't know if this was before or after 13 met him in the haunting of Villa Diodati, but I thought I'd mention it anyway. In terms of the placement of this audio, we might as well put these two audios together, and there's nothing particularly in this story that places it, but there will be in the next one. The Sting of the Sasquatch. The second audio original for the 15th Doctor is Sting of the Sasquatch, which finds the TARDIS duo in modern-day Northwest America, where they encounter a pair of creatures that local Bigfoot investigators assume are the famous creatures from American legend. The Doctor and Ruby have apparently just been to a pink ice planet. The Doctor mentions he has never met a Sasquatch. Some Yetis, yes, of course. First, in the second Doctor's era, they were robots working for the Great Intelligence, and that he'd discovered the Loch Ness Monster, in actual fact, a Skasaran, a pet of the Zygons that the fourth Doctor encountered. While the Doctor has not met a Sasquatch before, River Song claims she has. In the short story, Suspicious Minds, she claims that Bigfoot's real name is actually Geraldine, and that Geraldine was annoyed the filmmakers caught her on a bad hair day, referring to the real-life so-called real footage of Bigfoot caught on camera. The implication there being potentially that it was just a woman with very messy hair that day. These Sasquatches in this story are actually sentient and telepathic aliens from another universe, but who can only communicate telepathically in their own universe, hence all the growling like animals in ours. These aliens grew their ships from seedlings and developed a technology called aboroportation, which allows them to travel between universes. Its power source was a threadworm called the Sleekis, but when they travelled to our universe, the Sleekis that came with them became vampiric and possessive, infecting indigenous life forms and took them over, absorbing their intelligence and making them aggressive. Many planets were wiped clean of the native populations. Now the Sasquatches travel the universes trying to hunt them down. The Sasquatches' own immunity to the creatures had been compromised as the worms evolved, and the first Sasquatches encountered by the TARDIS duo were infected. During that encounter, though, Ruby was also infected, but Sasquatches have been taking infected humans back to their universe to cure them, and they do that with Ruby too. One of the other humans taken, Ruby somewhat feels like she recognises. A greying blonde woman, perhaps 60, but can't place it. This is likely another occurrence of the Susan Triad type character scattered through time by Sutek. That would place this sometime before Dot and Bubble, when Ruby starts to really recognise Susan more firmly, around about the same time as 73 Yards, where she has a similar amount of recognition in this story to Susan as she did in that one. so let's place both these audios just after 73 yards. And that's what we've got for this episode. I've almost finished the novel Eden Rebellion, and hopefully I'll have the footage from the e-mobile game story by next episode as well, so we'll cover those then, as well as, at the time of recording, the upcoming Christmas special, although you'll have probably seen that by the time this episode comes out. In the meantime, let me know which of these stories was your favourite in the comments below, and do you think I've placed everything in the right place on the timeline? And for more 15th Doctor content, check out this ranking of 15 Season 1 outfits by clicking on the screen now.